Evening, everybody. It's good to be back in the house of the Lord. Good to be here on a Wednesday night again, being absent last week. Thank Brother Owen for taking you through a journey of the Old Testament and a little bit of the book of Romans chapter 11. I heard he really talked bad about me. Is that true? Did he really rake me over the coals? Yeah. Well, I appreciate him filling in for me anyway. All right, take your Bibles. Well, I'm just going to be honest. We're probably not going to need them tonight. There'll be a few moments of Bible here, but I am going to take us through a little of a review. It's been a bit since we've been here, so I'm going to take us through a little of a review, just kind of hop, skip, and jump through that. And then my hopes are tonight, the end result will be, I'm going to take us all the way up to the conclusion of World War II, the establishment of Israel as a nation, 1948. So that's my hopes, where we'll get. So it's all about the land. So whose land is it? If you've done any reading about this, we talk about who are the indigenous dwellers. That means the natives. Who were the natives? And, quite honestly, that's just hard to determine anywhere. We have that argument in our country about the natives of our country, Native Americans, all of that, and that's just kind of a hard topic to really talk about. Well, we know from the Old Testament that the Canaanites dwelled the land. So Genesis chapter 9 verse 18, Moses is writing Genesis, and he says that of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Ham is the father of the Canaanites. And so then Genesis 10:18, the families of the Canaanites were dispersed. What that means, they spread out throughout all of this region. When Abraham shows up to the land that God had called him to and the land that God had promised him, Genesis 12:6 says, and the Canaanites were then in the land. And Abraham, throughout his life, he owned a graveyard. That's all he owned. He bought a piece of property to bury his wife, and then ultimately he was buried there, and then his son Isaac, his wife, Jacob, and so on. And that's in Hebron today. And you can go visit that place. Did y'all go visit that place? Y'all didn't go visit that place. It's Arab quarters, Arab occupied, but you can go visit that place. Next slide. So here's the map that we saw. The Canaanites, and they were all the Sidonites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, and all the otherites. All of those different people, and they are descendants of Ham. All of these names are names of sons or grandsons of Ham. Next slide. And then efforts have been made to trace the Canaanite people and even to connect them with the Arab people. But they have all failed. Even the Arab people deny that. The Arabs say, we are not the Canaanites of that period. We are not them. In fact, most of your Arab people are going to say, we are descendants of the son of Abraham named Ishmael. So they're going to trace their lineage through Ishmael. We'll look at that in just a moment. But just noting here that God had told the nation of Israel to drive the people out, to eradicate them. There's many reasons for that. God even told them that He did so slowly, and there's built within that God's opportunity for those people to repent and to accept Him as the one true God. But they didn't, and their lifestyles and their religions were very evil. And if we read about what they did, human sacrifices and so on and so forth, God punished them for the evil and the rejection of Him. And God did not want the Israelites to intermarry with those Canaanites. You remember that. And then furthermore, God did not want the Canaanites later on to claim rights to that land. And let's just be honest, the Israelites were not faithful to follow God's plan. And there were Jebusites in the days of David still occupying the land. So they didn't do what God said. And so in some senses, Israel has brought problems upon themselves. Israel has brought the problems upon themselves. They have some blame in this whole game as well. Next slide. So potential Arab ancestries, we've talked about that. We have Ishmael, who is the son of Abraham. He's not the promised son, but we looked at Ishmael's life and we learned that God said, I'm going to bless him. He's going to be the father of 12 princes. And we tried to identify who those were. And so God blessed Ishmael. Then we have the Moabites and the Ammonites, which are the sons of Lot in the bad situation with his daughters. You know, the Bible just writes the truth, good, bad, and the ugly. Esau's sons were the Edomites. And I wrote that wrong, didn't I? Yes, I wrote that wrong. I don't know why I have Esau's sons there. That should be Isaac's sons. So you can make that correction right there. So the Esau was the twin brother of Jacob, and Esau's descendants were the Edomites. And we know that Esau married an Ishmaelite, and he married a Hittite and Hivite. The Ishmaelites, obviously, descendants of Abraham. Hittites and Hivites, descendants of Ham. So we start seeing the intermixing of the various groups of people even at this time. Then we have Abraham marrying again and having 6 sons by Keturah. And so these are all potential, and I say potential Arab ancestry, but none of these people dwelled in the Promised Land. None of these people dwelled in the Promised Land. They all dwelt in the Sinai Peninsula, or they dwelt east of the Jordan River, and so they did not dwell in Israel proper. Next slide. Then we just walk through the history of this. We have Abraham, who gave birth to Isaac, who gave birth to Jacob, who gave birth to the 12 tribes of Israel. So give you some dates to kind of get this clear in your mind. And these are round numbers, okay? These are not exact. 2000 BC. So that's as far removed from the birth of Jesus Christ before the birth of Christ as we are removed after the birth of Christ. So get that in your head. So 2,000 years prior to the birth of Jesus Christ was the days of Abraham. 500 years later-ish, the Exodus. So Jacob took his family into Egypt, 70, was it exactly 70? 70-something. 70, and then they stayed until there was a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, and then they had to have Moses to come in and lead them out, and this is around 1500 BC, 500 years later. So then let's just say 1500, Joshua. So we have the wandering in the wilderness, 40 years, and then Moses dies, Joshua takes over, and that is the time when they finally are given the command by God to go in and conquer the Promised Land in the days of Joshua. And Joshua got it started. 30 years, Joshua got it started. But the conquering of the Promised Land went all the way up to the days of David. So when is David? 1000. So always remember, Abraham 2000, David 1000, Jesus 0. That's easy to remember. So from this time of Joshua, 1500, to the time of David, 500 years, they were still trying to conquer the Promised Land. You can read the book of Judges, which is about 300 years of history, and they did a really poor job of trying to conquer anything except themselves. But so then we move, it's really, we can say Saul, but it's really David, that the kingdom of Israel is established in the land. We got Jerusalem, the capital. We've got the city of David. David fought a lot of battles. But by the end of David's life, he had pretty much has got everything under control. And right now for Sunday school, you'll study it in about a year. I'm writing through the life of Solomon. In fact, I just finished it, writing through the life of Solomon. That's not all the quarter, but I just finished writing through that. And basically, Solomon got to live on the hard work of his father David. And so this goes Kingdom of Israel to 586 BC, which is the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, and there's no more Israel. So for approximately 600 years, there was a nation named Israel living in the land. Next slide, and you'll see this is a representation of the kingdom that Solomon had. And you'll notice Solomon did a lot of things that weren't right, like a lot of us do. But Solomon went too far in his occupation of property and land. God had told him to leave the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Edomites alone. And Solomon didn't. He didn't, quote, conquer them, but he enslaved or made them servants of his kingdom, made them pay tribute. That wasn't God's idea. But anyway, in the kingdom of Solomon, they occupied most of the land. Most of the land. Not all of it, but most of it, more than they ever have in their entire history. So this was the time of King Solomon. Next slide. So then we walk through all of the occupations. Okay, so Israel had the land 1000 BC to 586 BC. Israel was in the land. Then the northern part of it fell in 722 BC. The southern, actually all that was really left, the more I read and all that was really left, even under the Assyrian conquest, was the city of Jerusalem and just a little bit outside of it. That's all that Israel occupied. And only by the prayers of King Hezekiah did they escape being destroyed by the Assyrians. You can read that in the Kings, the 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and even the book of Isaiah. 3 times it's mentioned there. So the Assyrians conquered, then the Babylonians conquered the Assyrians, who then eventually conquered and destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. 586, you see the dates there, 612, 539. We go backwards. This always confuses me, number challenge guy. Then around in 539, the Persians defeat the Babylonians and occupied Israel to 329. Then Greece defeats the Persians, and they have the land intertestament period between the Old and New Testament from 329 to 63. This is where you get the Maccabees, and this is where you get Happy Hanukkah, y'all. This is where Hanukkah got its start. And then 63 BC, Rome. And who owns Israel during the New Testament? It's the Romans. The Romans have Israel, and here's their dates there. 324 is sort of an arbitrary date where the east and the west of the Roman Empire sort of divide. And the west no longer occupy Israel, but the Byzantine, Eastern Rome, Constantinople, all of that, they are now in control of Israel through 324 to 638. And then we have Muhammad, the birth of Islam, Sinai Peninsula, the Muslim Empire. Muhammad is dead by the time the Muslims occupy or conquer the Byzantine Empire. See, they're not fighting Israel. they're fighting each other. So the Muslims defeat the Byzantines 638. They have it to 1099. Then we have the Catholic Church of Europe deciding that they want to reoccupy Israel. They want to have that land. And so they send the Crusaders. The Crusaders defeat the Muslims. It's a back and forth kind of deal, all the way up to 1260. Next slide. And then the Mamluks, I know you've heard of those. You know, you've got the T-shirt, you know, I'm a fan. No, never mind. The Mamluks were kind of a quasi-Muslim group. They were mercenaries, and they had been hired by the Muslims to fight battles for them. And then they decided that they didn't want to work for the Muslims anymore, and they just became their own people. So they were Muslim, but they occupied Palestine 1260 to 517. And these are periods of time where we call them the Dark Ages, and they are really dark because we just don't have a lot. We don't have a lot of history about them. People just weren't, I think it was a time period where people were just trying to survive, and they didn't have time to write their history. So now we're getting caught up. The Ottoman Empire, and you'll notice 517 to 1917 AD. And I know that when I was studying world history and all that, this is the times when I went to sleep in high school and I didn't listen to these things. I'm learning a whole lot about everything that was going over in the East. I knew a lot about England and France and Spain and all of that stuff, the European history, but I didn't really know what was going on over here in the East. But really, it was the Ottomans, the Turks. They were Turkish. They were the Turkey today is the remains of the Ottoman Empire. They were Muslim, but they were different. And they didn't like the Arabs, and the Arabs didn't like them. But the Ottoman Empire basically controlled this area for about 400 years. And you'll notice that it's up to World War I. The Ottoman Empire occupied the property, Israel, up to World War I. So just hang on to that. And then after that, after World War I, that's hard for me to say, is the time of the British. And this becomes very essential to understand the Israel-Palestinian conflict today. Why are they fighting so much? It has a whole lot to do with this British mandate. That in 1948, Israel becomes a nation. Now, it's important to note, because of indigenous dwellers, Israel occupied this land prior to any of these world powers. So if we're talking about indigenous dwellers, Israel is an indigenous dweller of the Promised Land. Even if we don't even use the Bible, we're just going to go political history. They are indigenous dwellers in the Promised Land. They have rights by being natives to this land. We're not even talking about the promises of God. We all believe in the promises of God. But I got to make a political argument, or at least let you understand the political argument of this. Next slide. So here's the Ottoman Empire. This is the Ottoman Empire. It's pretty big. Notice that it controls Greece. It's a big place. Next slide. So let's talk about Israel under the Ottoman Empire. Loosely managed. They were not strong controllers. They, somewhat like the Romans, would allow local leaders to basically take control of things as long as you paid your taxes. And when the Ottoman Empire was strong, things were really good. And in fact, during this time, around the 1600s, we saw an influx of Jewish people coming back to the land because it was beginning to flourish again. And then as the Ottoman Empire began to decline and they began to increase taxes, then it became more and more difficult. Now that's important because in the Ottoman Empire, much of the land, last slide there, much of the land was owned by absentee landowners, people who lived maybe in Turkey proper around Istanbul, but they had this land, and they sort of had a sharecropping situation going on. So you could, quote, lease the land in the sense that you farm the land, you plant your crops, and then when you harvest your crops, then a third of them, or maybe half of them, goes back to the landowner, and you get to keep half. And so that's how it worked all the way up to the 1900s. So all the way up to the 1900s, this was still going on. And land ownership, this is what I'm getting at. Who owns the land? Land ownership was really not organized and put on paper until about the 1850s, when we first started seeing people drawing up a semblance of some kind of deed. And so that's kind of important to remember. Who owns the land? So this is the conditions. The land was basically desolate. You had a few sharecroppers, but it was not a prosperous place. Next slide. So by the mid-1800s, there was an increase. In fact, archaeology as a separate discipline and study was born around the 1850s. I don't know the exact date, but around that time. When people go dig up old stuff, that started around the 1850s. And there were a lot of European and American scholars that traveled to where else? Israel, the land of Jesus and Abraham. And they began to see the poor conditions of the Promised Land. And many of these people, or not many, some of them were Jews. American Jews working in universities, British Jews working in universities, and they went back to the Promised Land and they were like, wow, this is awful. And all of the dilapidation of the property. Now at the same time, there was an increase. And I really dug, and I'm not 100% sure why. I don't know that I have a good answer to why anti-Semitism increased, but it did. In this country, in France, in Spain, in Great Britain, in Germany, in Italy, in Russia, in the Arab countries, it was like 1850s up to the 1900s, everybody decided the Jews were horrible. And some of our famous Americans wrote some really horrible things about the Jews. I don't have a good explanation, except it happened all over the world. Maybe it was God. Maybe it was God using that. But because of increased interest in the Promised Land, increased persecution, ostracization, Spain, for example, kicked all the Jews out of their country. If you're a Jew, you can't live here. And they kicked them all out. Russia was really hard they actually took all of the Jews, or as many of them they could, took all the Jews and they moved them over. It's an interesting story, but they moved them all the way over to the west. Anybody heard of Poland? That's pretty much where they moved them to. Moved them all over to the west, and it's got a name for it, and I don't remember what it was. Scarlett probably knows what it is. It's got a name. But that's why all the Jews ended up over in Poland. And it didn't end there. They didn't just put them all over there and just say, and they actually made that place very prosperous, by the way. This is the thing about the Jews. You can beat them down, but they always, it's just like everything they touch turns to gold. I wonder why. But that's what was going on. So we have a lot of Russians, and there's still, and I actually looked at that statistic, in the Jewish population today, somewhere in the neighborhood of over 50% of Jews trace their family lineage back to Russia. There was people that came from Poland. There was people that came from Eastern Europe, so like Austria and Hungary and Germany and Spain and all of these different European places, and in some of the Arab countries. And this was the Great Immigration. 1880s, go ahead and go to the next slide. 1880s up to about 1948 was the Great Immigration of the Jews back to the Promised Land. And it was thousands. It continued to increase as the years went by, but it continued to be more and more and more. So you see 1880 to 1948, the period of great immigration. Now, Zionism. Maybe you've heard that terminology before. Maybe you've heard it in a bad sense. Maybe you heard it in a good sense. But Zionism basically is pro-Jewish. It's just a pro-Jewish thing. And the origins of Zionism was this. We want a homeland for the Jewish people. Nobody likes us. Nobody wants us in their country. The Americans don't want us. They put us in ghettos. The Germans don't want us. They put us in concentration camps. The Russians don't want us. They kick us all the way over to the edge of their country. Give us a homeland and let us live, and they called it self-determination. Let's live by our own making. And it wasn't always Israel. It wasn't, let's go to Israel. They actually, up in New York, and I forget which one of those islands it was up there, but there was a Jewish man that bought an island up in New York, and he wanted to make that island its own country, a Jewish country, or at least a Jewish state. They tried to do the same thing in Africa. They were going to buy property in Africa. See, there was a lot of colonialization in Africa by the Brits, and there was a lot of Jews in Britain. And so they said, just give us a portion of this colony, and we'll just be Jews there. Well, it was in, next slide, it was in about 1880, 1890s. This guy, you may have heard his name, Theodore Herzl, was the guy that, he was a writer. Okay, if you're a writer, you can get a whole lot of things done. You can get your message out there. So he was a writer. He was born in Hungary, but he was a Jew. And he began to write about Zionism and bringing the nation of Israel back to the Promised Land. And I mean, he wrote and wrote and wrote and made flyers and wrote in the newspapers and just everywhere that he could get his word out. And it really started a big stir of people saying, yeah, we can do this. We can do this. This is not a pipe dream. This is not something that's unreasonable. We can go back to the Promised Land and we can build Israel again. And so this is Zionism. Now, Zionism was not religious. I would even say that it was, I don't want to say it was anti-religious, but it would be religious. It was more of a secular, socialist, nationalist movement. It was all about the Jews, not God. In fact, many of the Orthodox Jews weren't for it. They were opposed to it. They didn't like the Zionists. Why didn't they like them? Because they were liberals. They were liberals. And they had learned, they were German, they were Russian, they were European mainly. Now there were some Arabs involved, but the leadership, I'm talking about the people who were calling the shots, they were European. Even the Russians, I know that's hard to believe, but even they were European. In their mindset, in their thoughts, there's some good to that, not so good at that, good to that, but we'll continue on. So the immigration of the Jews to the land of Israel is the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Why are the Arabs mad at the Jews? Because they came. That's why. Why are the Arabs that are there, and now we're removed several generations, were mad at the Jews because they came and dwelt in the land that they were dwelling in. Just like some of us don't have such a great opinion of immigration in our country. So I can kind of understand that a little bit from the Arab point of view. Now, don't throw me under the bus, okay? But I can understand. There were Arab people in the land prior to the Jewish arrival. But this is very key, and this was kind of a game changer for me. The immigrant Jews bought the land they settled. They paid cash. They paid for it. They didn't go in and steal it. They didn't go in and say, "Get out of here, Arabs, this is my land." No, they went in and they said, "We'll buy your property." And then they found out that the people who were living on the land didn't own the property. Remember, where did they live? They lived in places like Istanbul and Turkey, and they were the wealthy landowners, but they didn't live there. So they got in touch with the wealthy landowners and said, "We'll buy your property." And this is just what I read, that they paid a little bit of an inflated price. Now, there were some very wealthy Jews in places like Europe, the United States, and they started this Jewish fund. And there were millions of dollars put into this Jewish fund. You know, we got some really wealthy Jews in the United States of America, right? That none of them wanted to go live in Israel, but we'll pay for some other Jews to live over there. And that's what they did. And they paid millions and millions of dollars, and they bought that property. They bought it. Now, this is initially, okay? Right now, we're just saying initially. But they bought that property. And the Arab people actually, go ahead and go to the next slide. They were displaced. I saw at the very end. The Arab people were displaced because the owners of the land sold the property to the Jews. It would be like this. You own a rent house, and somebody is renting that house from you. And then you decide, "I don't want that rent house anymore. I want to sell it." And so you sell that rent house to the next person, and the new owner decides they don't want the renter there, they want to live in it. Whose fault is that? Nobody's. It's nobody's fault. That's all legal. We might say it's a shame. We might say, "I'm sad for them." But quite honestly, if you pay for a piece of property, you don't have to let somebody live there. It is what it is. Now you can say, "But it's just horrible the Jews did that." Okay. But it's not illegal. It's not wrong. I wouldn't even say it's ungodly. So that's what happened in the very early days. There's more, but this is what happened. And this was a problem. Now you read this. The Jews were indigenous people. The Jews were persecuted and displaced in places like Russia and Europe. And these Jews had no other place to go. They were I guess they could have continued to live there under persecution and distress, but they said, "We're tired of this." And this is what Zionism was all about. We want a place that we can live in peace. I'm not sure if they ever got that, but that was the goal anyway. And then the Arabs, they were indigenous, not prior to the Jews, but they were indigenous. And I think there are some innocent Arab people in all of this. There's some Arab Christians. In fact, if you want to listen to a good podcast, and it's a hop, skip, and jump. It takes forever to get a new episode out. But it's done by Christianity Today, and it's called The Promised Land. And it's really good. And Mike Cosper is the guy who went over there right after July the 6th. And he talked to both Jews and Arabs, and he talked to this Christian university that is in Bethlehem. And he talked to the president of that Christian university in Bethlehem. And he's Arab. He's an Arab, but it's a Christian university. And he talked about the struggle that they have with all of these land rights and all of the things that are going on. It's pretty interesting. It gives kind of a fair view of some of the Arab struggles in all of this. But the Arabs were indigenous to this land. They were displaced by the sale of the land, and they had nowhere to go. So that kind of helps you understand where some of this grassroots conflict comes from. Next slide. Now let's go to World War I. I told you it's going to be history. So there's your dates for World War I. United States didn't get involved until 1917. We were a very minor player in World War I. It was France and Great Britain, pretty much France and Great Britain. But Russia, the United States, Italy, and Japan, we had some part in it. The Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire. That's important to see. The Ottoman Empire was on Germany's side, and Bulgaria. So the Allies won. France and the United Kingdom, Brits, they wanted to, quote, get paid for winning this war. And they wanted what remained of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was defeated. It collapsed. They did give, this is the creation of the country called Turkey. And by the way, the creation of countries like Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, a lot of these countries, that's where they got their name. That's when they got started. Is in the midst of this Ottoman Empire, we want the property. France and the UK went to the League of Nations, which ultimately became the United Nations. They went to the League of Nations and they said, we want to carve up the Ottoman Empire, and then we want, it was basically France, the United Kingdom, and Russia. And we want to divide it up. And that's what happened the end of World War I up to the start of World War II. Next slide. So I just said a lot of that. The land of Israel was given to the Brits. It was called the British Mandate. So the Brits came in 1917, 1918. They came in, and the Brits, they built military bases, they built government houses, and they said, we're going to maintain this property. French did it up in Syria. Russia got some of what is what do you call those? The Uzbekistan and all those stands. They got all that property. Southern Russia, but that didn't matter for us. We're just talking about Israel. Now, at the very onset of this, there were two things that were said at the very beginning. We want to give the Jews a homeland, and we want to give the Arabs a homeland too. We don't want to take Arab land away from the Arabs and give it to somebody else. We want the Arabs to have a homeland, and we want the Jews to have a homeland. And if everybody would have played nice, that would have happened. If everybody would have played nice, that would have happened. But the French didn't play nice. The British didn't play nice. The Jews didn't play nice, and nor did the Arabs. Nobody played nice. So throughout this period after World War I, it was just a mess, as we humans are well known for making. We're good at making messes. Next slide. So here is what it looked like. So you can do all the colors. So the Brits were in the pink. The light pink is what they ruled. The dark pink is what they protected. I'm going to get back to the red, and then you see what the French controlled, you see what the Russians got. That red, under British, French, and Russian protection. That land was carved out. What's that look like? That's Israel, isn't it? And they picked that out, and they said, what we plan to do, we're going to put it under protection, but all the while, here's our goal. We're going to divide up that land between the Arabs and the Jews. And we're going to build a Jewish homeland, and we're going to build an Arab homeland. That's what we're going to do. Now, here's what happened. Fast forward just a little bit. The Russians, Bolshevik rebellion. Everybody knows all about that. Scarlett, you want to take over here? No, okay. Scarlett she's a minor historian in Russian history. But the Russians were having a hard time, and they couldn't help much. The French had a rebellion, 1917. They couldn't help much. So guess who it was left to? The British. The British were left with, and they were in good place, and they were left with taking care of this property. So it basically became, and ultimately it was signed over. The French signed it over, the Russians signed it over, and now it's the British mandate. Next slide. So in 1917, there was this thing called the Balfour Declaration. It's important. Why is it important? Because in that Balfour Declaration, I have no idea where I'm at in my notes. In that Balfour Declaration, it was said in black and white, the British will create as soon as possible a homeland for the Jewish people. And the British, in doing so, will not infringe upon the rights of the Arab people currently dwelling there. Sounds like a good plan, right? But go over there. And you got Benton and they're Arabs. You got Bryant, we're Jews. You got Little Rock, it's a mix. If you get southwest Little Rock, it's all Arabs. You got over in West Little Rock, that's all Jews. And that's what it looks like. It's a mix. And you can't draw lines. It was bad. Now here's what, we got any British in here? Good. All right, so we can talk bad about the Brits. Is it just me, or are the Brits really good at telling you we're going to do this much and they deliver on this? Well, that's what they did. They promised the world and gave them a pebble. And it didn't set well with the Jews, the Arabs, or anybody. And so this was an era of time where there was more confusion about what people were going to do. And so 1918 to 1948. Oh, by the way, I want to mention this. In the early days of all of this, we're going to make an Arab nation, we're going to make a Jewish nation. The Arabs supported making a Jewish homeland. They did. Anybody know Lawrence of Arabia? Come on. Do y'all know the movie at least? Well, who's the actor? Who's the actor? Come on. Peter O'Toole. Go watch Lawrence of Arabia. It'll make more sense to you now. But this guy, and I probably won't say his name right, Amir Faisal or something. He was a prince in the Arabian Peninsula. He was a king of the Arabian people down in Saudi Arabia. And he was Lawrence of Arabia's right-hand man. They were a team. Lawrence of Arabia was from Britain. This guy was he was an Arab. They went to the League of Nations together to lobby to give the Arab people, after the Ottoman Empire fell, the Arabs fought against, this is Lawrence of Arabia, the Arabs fought against the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, and they helped defeat the Turks, and to pay the Arabs back, we're going to give you land. And this guy and Lawrence of Arabia went to the League of Nations, and they lobbied for the Arab people, and guess what got born out of that? Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia came out of that effort, and that's the Sinai Peninsula today. So the Arabs did get some land, not just, but they didn't get the land. So from 1918 into World War I to 1948 was a period of lots of confusion, British double talk. What I mean by that is they would say one thing and then they would say something else. Misunderstandings between the British, the Jews, the Arabs, but all the while this was happening. Growth of a Jewish population, organization, infrastructure in Palestine, and then also this was beginning to happen. This is where it got started. Growth of Arab resistance to the Jewish presence in Palestine. This is where the conflict got started. Now you say, yeah, but it goes all the way back to Bible times. But they hadn't been fighting all the way 2000 BC. The current conflict is right there. That's where it got started. Next slide. So now, World War II. We go from World War I. We got all this confusion. It's unsettled. But guess what? We got a war again. So all this stuff gets put on the back burner. We got to fight the Germans. We ain't got time to think about Israel and Jews and Arabs right now. We got Germans to think about. And so World War II breaks out. And quite honestly, the United Kingdom took a beating in World War II. They come out on the winning side, but they were, prior to World War II, the strongest nation in the world, the United Kingdom. After World War II, no, they were not. This is where the United States got its claim to fame in our efforts in World War II. Colonialization was coming to an end. People began to see the wrong of that. What is colonialization? You go into Africa and you colonize a piece of property that, oh, by the way, has a lot of gold and silver and trees, and we mine all that out. We cut all your trees, we ship it back to Britain, and we'll build you a school and a hospital and say, have a good life. That's colonization. It was a really bad thing. I mean, it really was. It was a bad way to do business. French did it, Spaniards did it. It's called, go to the Bahama Islands, Haiti, places like that. That was colonization. It was a bad thing. No justification for it. So it was coming to an end. British were uncolonizing, and basically this British mandate was a British colony. So they were uncolonizing. Furthermore, the United Kingdom had no money. They had spent all their money in World War II. They couldn't take care of their responsibilities. And so the United Kingdom, Brits, basically said, we're going to turn over the Mandate of Palestine. We're going to turn Israel over to the United Nations. That just got formed, by the way. It just got started right after World War II. The United Nations was formed, or I think it was right in the middle of World War II. It got formed, and so we said, hey, here's this problem we hadn't had time to deal with. Would you fix that? And so it got put on the United Nations table. So, and it took years, 1945 to 1947, and in 1947, the war's over. The United Nations came up with this partition plan for Palestine. What's that mean, partition? We're going to divide it up. You're going to see a map and you'll kind of laugh at it. Dividing the land into a Jewish state, an Arab state, with the city of Jerusalem under international control by the UN. Jerusalem under international control by the UN. This was the plan. The Jews accepted the plan. They said, hey, we're a team player. We'll do it. The Arabs did not. Was it a mistake? Well, let me just say, the Arabs, Palestinians, have never had a country. Period. Never. They have a Palestinian occupation, they have a PLO and a Palestinian Authority and all of this stuff, but they don't have a sovereign nation. They never have. I don't know if they ever will. They got to get their act together, but they haven't. The Jews got their nation, the Arabs did not. The Jews cooperated with the other countries of the United Nations. The Arabs would not. Nobody got what they wanted. Next slide. That's what it looked like. So the purple is what the Jews got. The pink is what the Arabs got. Is there a straight line there? That's a mess, isn't it? That is a mess. I mean, I don't have any solutions here. I mean, we've had every country on the planet trying to make solutions here. I don't have any solutions, but that's not a solution. That's a mess, is what that is. So you just look at that, you see, you can kind of see where the Mediterranean Sea is. You see where Gaza is. West Bank basically hit Jerusalem, the little yellow, which was international controlled, and go to Jordan River. That's the West Bank. I mean, Israel was unconnected. It was a mess. The Jew says, we'll take it. And they did. The Arab says, we're not playing. And they didn't. Next slide. So this is Philip Miller's opinion, and it's probably racist. Can I call myself a racist? I guess I'll just call myself a racist. But in all of my reading and study, this is what I found out. This is what I think. This is what I think. What's the motivation? What's the motivation? Why do the Arabs hate the Jews so much? And probably the other way. Why do the Jews hate the Arabs so much? I think it's not about religion. The Jewish nation, Israel proper, has the same religious freedoms as we do, maybe even more so. They have religious freedoms absolute. You can be a Muslim, you can be a Christian, you can be a Jew, you can be a nothing. In fact, there are more Jews who are nothing than Jews who are Jewish, Judaism, or they're not Jewish religion. So I don't think it's about religion. I'm a little bit cynical. It's about the money, honey. It's what it's about. So there is no oil in Israel. You can grow stuff there. They have a pretty thriving agricultural setting. But this is what the Jews did. So you read all that. The Arabs had been farming this land for centuries, and they were barely able to scrape out a living. These immigrant Jews from places like Europe and Russia, who were trained in agriculture, learned how to irrigate, fertilize, and they made that desert blossom as a rose. And guess what they were making? Money, honey. And guess who got jealous? We want that. I had never been over there. These two have, so they can vouch for me. Go to an Arab village. Go to a Jewish village. They say that one of the most expensive places to vacation is Caesarea. Did y'all go to Caesarea? Caesarea by the sea? Do you see all the condos and all that? They say they're overwhelmingly expensive. Yeah. So those places on the Mediterranean Sea, Israel, are tourist destinations for the wealthiest of the wealthy. I mean, they are wealthy. The Jews are wealthy. Not all of them, but Israel as a whole is a wealthy nation. And the Arabs, they don't like it. And they want what the Jews have. Next slide, and I'm about out of time, but I'm big time out of time. 1948, May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, first Prime Minister of Israel, declared Israel's independence, read the Declaration of Independence of Israel, and they were declared a sovereign nation on the same day. Harry Truman, President of the United States, recognized Israel as a new nation on that same day. Guess what happened on May 15th of 1948? The War of Independence. the Arabs came marching in. They declared war on the newly formed nation, and on May 15th of 1948, that morning, go ahead and go to the next slide.
They waited that long?
Yeah, they waited all of 6 hours. Is there another slide? Is that it? Oh, it's in my next presentation then. Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. Saudi Arabia gave money. Muslim Brotherhood, the Palestinian Authority, wasn't called the PLO at that time, they were called the Palestinian Authority. They came in and attacked Israel. And I'll have to start there next time. Comments, questions?
Was that the 6 Days War?
No, that's 1967. Yeah, we will get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that. 6-Day War, 1967. Any others? Questions?
Just thank you. I didn't have a clue. I just know if God is with you, who could be against you?
Well, and we're going to see more of that, for sure. Yes.
Of course, I have brain freeze a lot, but about 3 weeks ago, Jack and I watched a movie with Kirk Douglas about this very war.
The 1948 war.
Right.
Oh, wow.
You can Google it and find out the name of it, but it was very, very interesting.
I'll have to watch that. 1948. Was it called War of Independence? What was the name of the movie?
I don't know the name of it.
Oh.
Just Google Kirk Douglas.
Yeah, Google Kirk Douglas in the 1948 War of Independence.
It's about the guy the Jews picked to go lead that army.
Okay.
They had no army.
Yes.
And I can't think of the name of it.
Yeah, I can't think of his name either, but he
was an American Jew.
Okay, he was an American Jew. I knew that there were many Jews. I'm going too long. There was an underground military unit, and it's got a Jewish name, and they had basically organized to protect the Jewish nation that didn't have a military. It wasn't a nation. They were protecting the Jewish settlements from the Arab attacks in the 20s and 30s and part of the 40s. And Ben-Gurion convinced that guy that you are talking about to become the army. And that was the difference between winning that war and losing that war. So, yeah. Okay, I got to watch that. All right. Anything else? All right, let me do some announcements, and we'll take time for prayer requests. So announcements for Sunday. There is one final. This is the last one, conversational Spanish class, this coming Sunday, 4 to 5 o'clock. Also, we have business meeting this coming Sunday. There will be a Vacation Bible School meeting at 2:30 on Sunday. On April the 21st, that's not Sunday, but it's a week from, we'd love for you all to sign up and help us to go do some outreach with Brother Alejandro and some of the Hispanic communities. So he's organizing that. That'll be Sunday, and we'll start at 4 o'clock. We need more volunteers for Vacation Bible School. There is a sign-up sheet on the bulletin board. Okay? Any other announcements? Yes.
The teens are going on a retreat on the 19th of April, and there's a list on the volunteer board. If you just feel compelled to make cookies or brownies or something that's easy to carry, they would deeply appreciate it.
Okay, so for the teen retreat that they're having the 19th through the 21st, if you want to provide some snacks and things, there's a sign-up sheet on the bulletin board. Others? Okay, well, it's time for me to say goodnight to our online audience, and appreciate you coming and being a part. If you have a prayer concern, send them our way. We'll help you pray for your prayer concerns.